Hi! On the Woodpecker today, I'm making a recycling bin for the kitchen. Like all of my neighbors, I have 3 nicely colored bins outside. One for the trash, another one for the table scraps, and one for the recycling. Inside the house, we also have one trash can, a little can for the table scraps, and this for recycling. I have to admit, this looks terrible. Yes, it works, but I want something nicer than that. Okay, this won't be difficult. I am going to use recycled oak flooring that was given to me by a subscriber. After opening the packages, I make piles according to the length of the wood. But before I can use those planks, I have to get rid of their tongues and grooves. I will take this opportunity to remove the nails that are still in the wood. When I'm done with the nails, I can take care of the other side. Next, I glue them in panels. I also wipe off the excess glue right away. I make sure their width is less than a foot, which is the size of my jointer. After a little while, I have enough panels to make my bin. When the glue is dry, I make their bottom side straight. With one straight face, it's easy to plane the other side. But the first side still needs some work. Since a turn on my planer is 2 mm, it's easy to figure out how much thickness I'm removing. Two millimeters was not enough for some glue-ups. Now that they all have the same thickness, I can glue them 2 by 2. But this time, I'm more careful about how I glue them. I make sure the glue line is well aligned, and I leave this to dry. After about 45 minutes, I remove the excess glue. I hadn't removed it because I didn't want to contaminate the wood. To assemble this bin, I'm going to use finger joints. So I begin by making a simple jig. After cutting a notch on the fence, I plane a piece of wood to the same size of the notch. Cut it and glue it inside the notch with instant glue. Now I need to unscrew the guide so I can move it to the width of the notch. Then it's time to make a test cut. Right away, I can see that it's too tight. And obviously, the joint doesn't fit. I remove the last cutter of my dado stack, add some shims, and make another test cut. This time around, it fits nicely. But I was not convinced, so I made a longer test with Baltic birch plywood. Now that I'm happy, I cut one side of all my glue-ups. Next, I cut all the panels I will need to make this bin. And it's a go for the finger joints. But this is starting really badly. As you can see, the panels moved during the cut. This won't help me at all. I make all the fingers for both narrow panels. But for the wide ones, I stick them together to make sure they won't move during the cuts. And it's time to cut more fingers. When I'm done, before going any further, I check the fit. This goes together? Not too badly. But because the cut moved at the beginning, I need to cut part of the box. Now I have to disassemble this so I can carve a recycling sign on the front. I begin by marking the center. But before I can continue, I need to open a spire. I make the job dimension to the size I want the sign to be. Then, it's not that difficult. I open a vectorial recycling sign that I found on the internet, make it the size I want it to be, and directly jump to make a V-carve toolpath. Next, I enter that I want the pocket to be 3 mm deep, and that the clearance pass is made with a 6 mm end mill. That's it. This is what the CNC will cut. I just need to go inside the shop now. In 10 minutes, the V-carving part is done. The next step is to remove the useless wood inside the V-carve. When this is done, I just need to clean a little inside with a chisel. And it's time to make an epoxy mix. After pouring both parts, I thoroughly mix this before adding the black powder. I make sure to measure it because I want the same amount of powder on each subsequent mix. Then I can fill up the pockets. With my first pour, I managed to fill half of the pockets, so I have to make another batch. As you can see, there are quite a lot of bubbles in my epoxy. To remove them, I use a blowtorch. But I have to be careful because, as you can see, it's easy to set epoxy on fire. And no surprise here, I managed to set one pocket on fire. I have to remove all the epoxy and refill it. This time around, I'm a little bit more careful with the blowtorch. Now I need to wait 24 hours before continuing. This gives me ample time to make the file to remove some of the excess epoxy. Making this file is quite easy. I select all the shapes and make an offset. With both the inside and outside shape selected, I make a pocket with 1.25 inches cleaning bit. But we won't see anything in the preview. This means that it's time to go back inside the shop and look at it on the CNC. I remove almost nothing on the first pocket, but it's removing a bit on the rest of the pockets. I need to reassemble this again because I need to make a groove right here for the bottom. For this, I'm going to use this bit that is made for making grooves on the bottom of a box. With the bin well clamped, I cut the groove. Now I can figure out the size of the bottom. For the narrow side, I stick some thin scraps of wood together. But I can use my usual tool for the wide part. When I find furniture in the trash, I pick it up and use the wood to make the ornaments that we sell at the Christmas fairs. I also keep anything that could be useful, like this piece of masonite that I'm going to use as the bottom. After removing the damaged part, I can adjust the rib fence to cut some masonite. The round bit left some round corners. I need to round off the bottom's corners. Now I can make the last test before gluing this. With all those fingers to glue together, I want to use some slow setting glue. Since I don't have any on hand, I have to order some. Meanwhile, I can still take care of the top. But this time around, I don't want to use epoxy, but a sapele plug. It's now time to go back to the computer to create the files that I will need. I begin by making a job the size of my top and import the same logo as before. As a matter of fact, all the operations here are the same as I did before for the front of the bin, with the exception that the logo is smaller and the pockets are 5 mm deep, and in record time I have the files for the female part of the logo. To make the male counterpart, I have to make another sheet and copy the logo's vectors on it. But I have to flip the logo so it will be oriented correctly and create a rectangle around it. Next, with all the vectors selected, I can make the V-carve toolpaths. Since I want some space between the plug and the top, and also some space between the top and the plug, I put a start depth of 4.25 mm and a flat depth of 0.75 mm. And here's the plug. But one thing is bugging me. As you can see, since the start depth is 4.25, the bit cuts all this thickness in one swoop. This is way too much for my V-bit. So I make another V-carve pass, but with a starting depth of 0 mm and a flat depth of 4.25 mm. Now if I simulate the cut, I can see this is done in several passes. This is way better. If I make the final cut I've already calculated after this, everything will be perfect. But the irony of this is a week after I did this, the version 12 of all Victrix software was released and they've added an option to actually just do this in a couple of clicks. I'm eager to use this in another project. But now it's time to return to the shop and let the CNC do its thing. After a little chisel work, I'm ready for the plug. It only needs to be cut now. But before I can try the plug in place, I need to remove what's left of the border. When this is done, I can finally try the plug in place. Everything seems fine, so I can apply glue on the slanted part of the cuts. It's not necessary here to be super careful, as long as there's some glue on both pieces. Now I can leave the plug in place and put a bunch of clamps, and I just need to wait for the glue to dry. When it is, I cut most of the plug on the table saw. The rest is done with the bandsaw. After removing what I can by hand, I pass this through the drum sander. After several passes, here's the result. Let's say I'm quite happy. But I'm still blocked. I had to wait 2 weeks before receiving my glue. This gives me the opportunity to do some chores around the house, like chopping firewood. In fact, I prefer cutting it, because I think it's faster and easier. As a bonus, working outside on this particular day was a treat, because it was the day of the total eclipse around here. This is what I was looking at the start of the eclipse. But since this takes a lot of time, we continued cutting some firewood. Look at the eclipse. Cut more wood. Look at the eclipse and take some pauses. I keep my eye in front of the box until its totality. Here's what this looked like. But I thought it'd be darker outside than this. But after 2 minutes, the sun was back, and since we were able to see what we were doing, we continued to cut some wood. Eventually, the moon passed, and finally, after 2 weeks, I received my glue. This means that I can do the final sanding inside the bin. When it's done, I spread glue inside all the fingers and put the first 2 pieces in place. I continue like this for all the corners. This means a lot of fingers. This is the reason why I wanted a type of glue that had a very long working time. Otherwise, this glue up would have been too stressful. Eventually, every piece is in place, and it's time to put a lot of clamps on this. Yes, I mean a lot. And now I need to wait for the glue to dry. But before leaving this, I clean the excess glue from the corners. Yeah, my assembly is not perfect. The test I made was way better. So I will make a mix of glue and sawdust and fill the gaps between some fingers. When the glue is dry, I can sand the exterior of the bin. But when it's time to sand the epoxy, I have to stop frequently to clean the sanding pad. I sand everywhere up until a grit of 220. Unfortunately, I find more gaps. Yes, I know, I should have put some calls. It would have added some pressure where it was important. It's not like I didn't know that. While the glue is drying, I can cut the lid to the right dimensions. Instead of measuring for the second cut, I use the actual bin. This is great. I really like it. But I need to soften the corners. Before applying some varnish, I clean everywhere with mineral spirits. This also gives me an idea of what it will look like when it's done. But I still need to apply some varnish. For this, I use a piece of an old t-shirt. When the first coat is done, I leave it like this for the night. The next morning, I lightly sand the varnish, clean it with mineral spirits again, and wipe another coat of varnish. I leave this like that for another full day. I don't keep just the wood of old furniture. I'll be using this recycled hinge. After cutting it to the right length, I screw it in place at the back of the bin and drill all the screw holes. I do the exact same thing for the lid. But before I can put the lid in place, I want to burn my logo and date under it. But I make a mistake. The feed rate is way too fast for my small laser. So I lower the feed rate and burn it again, so it will be darker. Now I'm satisfied, and I just need to screw the lid in place. And with this last screw, our new bin is finished. I just need to put it in place. This was our new interior recycling bin that I made using only recycled materials. I'm very happy with my top inlay logo, but René prefers the one I did with epoxy. What do you think? Thank you, and see you soon for another episode of The Woodpecker.